It's Wednesday, November 29th, 2023. And it's about 8 o'clock in the morning. It's about 40, maybe 42 degrees outside. Barely any wind. Nice and cool morning. Let me go check on their water. Yeah, I see frost out here. I'm pretty sure the weather report's wrong. You don't get frost in 40-degree weather. It has to be below freezing, doesn't it? So maybe the weather station is warmer than here. Yeah, there's something that, so tomorrow it's going to rain like 1.5 inches. There's something that bothers me. A lot of things bother me. Having worked in web development and database and all that kind of stuff, and I was what you call the full stack developer back in the day. I don't know if there's such a thing anymore. Yeah, there's a little leak going on here. Not very much, but a little. So I go to the weather report, and it said there's a 100% chance of rain, and it says it's going to rain 1.48 inches. And I was like, what? So down to the 100th of an inch how much it's going to rain. The answer is no. They don't. They don't even know to the inch. It might rain 1/2 inch. It might rain 4 inches. Nobody knows. The numbers that we use in the scientific community, the number of digits we use, is significant figures or significant digits, indicates our confidence in the number, right? So if I wrote 1.48, that would mean 3 significant figures, and that would mean I know it's going to be 1.48 plus or minus about 5 thousandths. So this is not something that's caught on, I think, in the rest of the industry or sciences, but I think it's something useful. The other thing is, I think somehow every number should always have a confidence interval attached to it. And when somebody says, like, it's going to rain 1 inch tomorrow, they should say 1 inch plus or minus 2 inches, or something like that. Some kind of confidence interval to give you, look at this grass. That's pretty nice. That's a good 6 inches. Some of it's 8 inches. Most of it's at least 4 inches. That's good grass. Yeah. So, some kind of confidence interval that you need to attach to every number. Otherwise, the number is perfectly meaningless. I do this to my family all the time. They hate it. They'll ask me a question. Like, hey, how many things do we need? I'll say, about 10. And they said, Dad, it was 12. I'm like, yeah, I told you about 10. 12's about 10. But you said 10. Like I said, about 10, Or somebody might say, how many eggs do we need? And I'll say, about 2 dozen, And by 2, I mean, like, it could be 1, it could be 3, maybe even 4, There's just not a lot of confidence there, And so when it ends up being 3 dozen, I'm like, see, I was right. And they're like, you're off by 12. That's 12. That's a big number. It's like, well, that's only 1 dozen. I guess this is the episode. Okay, guys, here we go. I'm going to explain to you why metric sucks and why I hate metric, okay? I know metric. I've used it a lot, and I hate it. And I think we should ban its use throughout the world. It should only be used in certain contexts, and those contexts are limited to the laboratory and computers and things like that, okay? To give you kind of an example of why metric sucks, let me tell you about, I think it's ISO 8601, which describes a way to indicate a date and time with incredible precision. Not only the time, but the time zone. And you can indicate dates, you can indicate times, regardless of time zone. It's a wonderful format. It's beautiful, I love it. But I have no occasion to use it outside of computers and databases and stuff like that. So, and it confuses the crap out of people when I say 2023-11-10. Okay, and they're like, what is that? I'm like, that's the ISO 8601 date standard. You know, learn the standard, use it. Anyway, so that's kind of my opinion on metric. Is it's useful in some very specific contexts, otherwise it's useless, right? Okay, what is useful measurements? Useful measurements are things that you have readily available to you and that you have everyday knowledge of. Okay, let me give you an example. You ready? I'm going to show you 1 inch. Boom, that's an inch, right? So 1 digit of your finger is about an inch. Okay, another way to look at it is the thickness of your finger is about an inch near the base. So down here, that's about an inch. Your hand, by the way, there's a unit called hand, is about 4 inches. So the width of your hand is about 4 inches. Now, is that incredibly precise? No, it's not. Is that good enough for places where inches are relevant? Absolutely. Right? So if I told my kid 4 inches and they put their hand down and measured it, if we're not doing some kind of precise work that requires, you know, higher accuracy, in which case I would have said 4.00 inches, right? Then that's good enough. Okay? If I said about 4 inches, they put their hand down and mark it off, I'm like, thank you. That's about 4 inches. Okay. A foot's about a foot. My foot's a little bigger than most people's, but a foot's about a foot. A yard is 3 feet. Guess what is about 3 feet? A step, right? Every step you take is about 3 feet. Some people are shorter, some people are longer, but it's about a yard, okay? If I say 10 yards and you take 10 steps, I'm like, that's good. That's exactly what I wanted. Now, the next unit of measurement that we're commonly familiar with after the yard is the mile. And a mile, as you all know, everybody knows this, is 5,280 feet. And you're like, what? That's not very useful. Okay, let me tell you the useful measures in between a mile and a yard, okay? Number 1, 1/8 of a mile is a furlong. I know we don't use that word very often. 1/8 of a mile is a furlong, okay? So half of a quarter mile is a furlong. By the way, a quarter mile, when I'm driving my car, is about as far as you can see in a city, right? Anything beyond that, there's stuff that's in the way you can't really see, right? So I can look, and if I can barely see the signals in the distance, I know they're about a quarter mile away, okay? A furlong is half of that, okay? Now, we don't use a furlong anymore because we don't really have a lot of context to use it. But I'm told, or I recall vaguely, that a furlong is about as much distance as you can plow in one day with an ox. So you take your plow, hook it up to the ox, and that's 1 solid day's worth of work. Okay? That sounds very useful, doesn't it? 1/8 of a mile. Okay. Now what's below a furlong? The next unit is a chain. A chain is 1/10 of a furlong. 10 chains is 1 furlong. Back in the day, you would get a chain that was a chain length, and you can use that for very accurate measurements. I think it's like 66 feet, if my math is correct, okay? If it's not, I'll have to look it up and correct you guys. But this is just from memory from studying this recently. When I put up my fence posts, they're about a chain apart, right? So from this post to that next post is 24 steps. 24 times 3 is about, 22 yards would be a chain. So it's about a chain, right? The distance between steps is a chain. Distance between posts, is a chain. The next one is a rod. I don't find the rod terribly useful. The rod, I think, is a quarter chain, right? So 4 rods make a chain. I'm told that back in the day, people had a physical rod that they'd use to measure things out. An acre. How many square feet is an acre? I don't know, it's like 14, I don't know. An acre is 10 chains by 1 chain. It's 1 furlong by 1 chain. Why would that be useful? Well, back in the day when we had serfs and peasants working land, and we were rotating our crops every year, you need to keep redesignating the field. And so what you would do is you would take a chain and measure out a distance, and then you'd go a furlong, about as far as you can plow in a day, and that was your acre. Okay? And that's basically an acre, right? So everybody knows what an acre looks like. They know that it's a chain and it's a furlong. Okay? Okay, that sounds crazy. And I know you Europeans, you're like, well, just use kilometers and meters. Okay? The problem with meters is it's weird. It's like almost a step, but not quite. Okay? You can't like measure on your body where a meter is. You kind of have to know in advance, like, oh, on me, a meter is like slightly above my knee or whatever. Okay? Or at your waist or something. I don't know exactly where a meter is. It's annoying. A centimeter is too small. Right? What's a centimeter? Oh, it's like my fingernail, a little less than my fingernail. Right? I know that 2.54 centimeters is 1 inch. So if I take 2.5 of my fingers, that's a centimeter. Right? So I can measure 2.5 centimeters for you really quickly. I can't do like 1 centimeter. Right? 5 centimeters is pretty easy. That's 2 inches. Right? Millimeter is kind of in this weird land in between a centimeter and microns, where, you know, a millimeter is about as far as you can measure with your eye on a ruler, but not really. It's like a little too big for that, right? I think in the instance of a point is like a 60th of an inch, I believe. And so a point is about as clear as you can see, right? Anything smaller than a point, you can't really see it. It's too small, right? It just all looks the same because of resolution and stuff like that. So anyway, a millimeter is too small, too big. Centimeter is too small. A meter is like a weird size that isn't really useful for anything. A kilometer is 1,000 meters. What does a kilometer mean? Like, is it like how far you can walk in an hour? No, that's like 5 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles, something like that, right? Is it maybe it's how far you can walk in 10 minutes? No, there's nothing that the meter system relates to that you're readily available in your everyday life, right? If you go with volume measures, for instance, a cup is about the size of a cup, a drinking cup. Okay, a pint is about as much beer as you can drink, right? Back in the day, a pint of beer would satisfy you, right? And then a gallon, what's a gallon? That's about as much water as you can drink in a day, right? These are very useful measures. A bushel, what's a bushel? That's about as much as you can carry easily, right? Do you see how easy these things were, right? People like measured things based on something that was readily useful, you know? And they can sit down and do complicated calculations because all of the calculations related to things that they were familiar with, right? So you can figure out like, oh, how much does a person eat in a day? And we have 1,000 people, so how many bushels do we need? That's pretty quick calculation, right? And with the metric system, it relates to things that aren't readily available. Like the meters related to the circumference of the earth or something like that originally. Now it's like a certain number of, I don't even know what it is. It's like meters measured in terms of the speed of light. Like nobody has access to the speed of light, you know? And other things like that. Anyway, that's my rant. I might just say like, oh, it's about a chain, right? To my kids, and I'll watch their faces go like, what's a chain, Dad? I'm like, it's about the distance between two posts, about 22 steps on me. Maybe it's 24 for you, maybe it's 20 for you, right? Because you're taller than me or whatever, you know. But measuring your field that way is going to make a lot of sense. And yeah, 10 chains by one chain by 1 furlong, that's an acre. 10 square chains is an acre. The weird one that doesn't make sense to me is rod. I don't really understand rod. It's like, I think like 2.5 yards or something. I'm not really sure what it is, you know. Anyway, guys, that's my little rant on measures. Yeah, none of the measurements in the metric system have anything to do with you. It has everything to do with like some weird person's idea of what should be universal, right? And that's why it's almost a completely useless system. Now, what the Americans have done, okay? All you Europeans out there complain that we're not using metric. That's a lie. We are using metric because everything that we use is defined in terms of the metric system. An inch is 2.54 centimeters. Exactly, right? There's no extra digits. There's no imprecision there. It's 2.54000000 forever, okay? So it's exactly 2.54 centimeters. And we've defined the other measurements similarly to that, right? So they all relate exactly. And because everything's a ratio of each other, we could sit down and write to you the exact ratio of miles to kilometers, right? No imprecision, right? So we can talk about billions of miles, trillions of miles, a cajillion miles, and have the same sort of precision you have with kilometers, right? But at the same time, everybody knows how far a mile is. You can walk about a mile in 15 minutes if you walk fast, right? Of course, everybody knows that a mile is 8 furlongs. So you just walk a furlong 8 times, and that's a mile. All right, guys, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.